My beloved child, there are moments that look almost ordinary from the outside, yet quietly divide a life into everything that came before and everything that follows. Your soulmate did not expect such a moment to arrive in a softly lit room, with a chair pulled close, a phone resting untouched in their hand, and a woman they had known for years speaking more slowly than usual. Nothing dramatic announced what was coming. There was no grand speech, no carefully prepared confession. Just a silence that seemed to grow deeper with every passing second, and then something happened that your soulmate still cannot explain away. She looked directly at them, as though she had been saving one thought until everything else had become unnecessary, and with barely more than a whisper, she said your name. Not a similar name. Not a memory your soulmate misunderstood. Yours. And the strangest part was not that she knew who you were. The strangest part was the expression that crossed your soulmate's face immediately afterward, because they realized she knew something about you that they had never told her. Stay with this for a little longer, because the meaning of that whisper did not become clear all at once. In fact, your soulmate initially tried to convince themselves it meant nothing more than affection, coincidence, or a passing memory. But then she reached toward the small table beside her, touched the corner of a folded piece of paper, and said something so simple that your soulmate stopped breathing for a second, not from fear, but from recognition. She said, "You have been misunderstanding the one person who never asked you to become someone else." And suddenly, every private moment your soulmate had been avoiding began returning at once. The unfinished conversations. The message they typed and erased. The photograph they still had but rarely opened. The times they almost reached for the phone because something inside them wanted to hear your voice, only to place it back down and convince themselves they were being sensible. What if the distance between two people is not always created because the feeling disappeared? What if sometimes distance grows because a feeling becomes too meaningful to handle carelessly? Your soulmate had spent so much time trying to define what happened between you that they had stopped asking the more important question: what had they been protecting themselves from? The answer began taking shape in that room, but not in the way they expected. The woman did not tell them to chase you. She did not make promises about destiny. She did not pretend to know what you would choose. Instead, she said something far more grounded, something your soulmate could not dismiss as wishful thinking. She reminded them of the person they had been when your connection first became important. Lighter. More honest. Less guarded. She remembered conversations where your soulmate spoke about you without realizing how differently their voice sounded. She remembered the small details they mentioned. The way you listened without interrupting, the way you noticed when something was bothering them even when they insisted they were fine, the way you could make an ordinary afternoon feel meaningful without trying to impress anyone. Your soulmate had forgotten those details because later memories became louder. Confusion became louder. Timing became louder. Other people's opinions became louder. Silence became louder. But she had remembered what existed before all of that noise. And here is where the story quietly changed direction. She was not speaking about whether you and your soulmate should simply return to the past. She was telling them that the past was never the point. "Look at what the connection revealed about you," she said softly. Your soulmate lowered their eyes because they immediately understood. Loving you, or whatever word they had been afraid to use, had revealed where they were still hiding from vulnerability. It had shown them how quickly they could retreat when something mattered. It had exposed the difference between being independent and being emotionally unavailable. And perhaps most unexpectedly, it had shown them that someone could see their imperfections without using those imperfections against them. Don't skip the quiet part here, because this is where your soulmate's understanding truly began changing. For a long time, they believed the most important question was whether you still thought about them. That question had followed them through ordinary mornings, long drives, crowded rooms, and nights when they opened old conversations only to close them again. But sitting beside this woman, your soulmate suddenly realized that another question mattered first. If they were ever given the opportunity to speak honestly with you again, would they finally be brave enough to speak without hiding behind pride, confusion, or perfectly chosen words? That realization settled over them slowly. They did not reach for their phone. Not yet. They simply sat there, looking at the dark screen in their palm, while the woman watched them with the faintest knowing smile. Then she asked, "Do you still have it?" Your soulmate looked up. For a second, they genuinely did not know what she meant. She nodded toward the phone. "The message you never sent." Everything inside your soulmate went still. Because she should not have known about that. Nobody knew. Months earlier, on a night when missing you had become impossible to ignore, your soulmate had written a message that was longer than anything they had ever sent you. They had written honestly about the misunderstanding between you. They had admitted where they had been unfair. They had admitted that acting distant had not made the connection disappear, it had simply made them better at pretending. They had even written one sentence they immediately regretted because it felt too revealing. "I think I lost something real because I kept waiting to feel less afraid of it." They never sent the message. They saved it, closed the phone, and told themselves that silence was probably kinder. Yet now this woman was asking about it. Your soulmate stared at her. "How did you know?" they finally asked. Her answer was not mystical. It was almost painfully simple. She said, "Because people who are truly finished do not keep rehearsing the truth." Those words followed your soulmate into the silence that came next. Something important is waiting for you inside that silence, because your soulmate began to understand that closure and avoidance can look strangely similar from a distance. Both can be quiet. Both can involve walking away. Both can involve not sending the message. But only one brings peace. And your soulmate, if they were finally honest with themselves, had not felt peaceful. They had felt unfinished. That distinction changed everything. The woman then touched the folded paper again, but she did not hand it over immediately. She asked your soulmate a question instead. "When you think of this person, what do you remember first, the hurt, or the kindness?" Your soulmate wanted to answer quickly, almost defensively, but something stopped them. Images began appearing in their mind. Not the dramatic moments. The smaller ones. You remembering something they had mentioned casually weeks earlier. You asking whether they had made it home safely. You sitting beside them during a moment when they did not know what to say and somehow making silence feel comfortable instead of awkward. You laughing at something that was not even particularly funny simply because they were happy. Your soulmate's eyes softened. They said, "The kindness." The woman nodded as though that answer confirmed something she already suspected. Then do not rewrite the entire story around the hardest chapter. That sentence stayed. It is still staying. Your soulmate would later repeat it silently while looking through an old photograph of you. They would repeat it while scrolling to your name in their phone. They would repeat it when remembering the final conversation between you and realizing how many things had been said from defensiveness rather than truth. And for the first time, they allowed themselves to consider a possibility they had avoided for a long time. Perhaps the connection had not failed because it was meaningless. Perhaps two people who mattered deeply to each other had simply reached a moment neither of them knew how to navigate. That does not guarantee an ending. It does not erase what happened. But it changes the meaning of what happened, and sometimes meaning is where healing begins. Then came the moment your soulmate was not prepared for. The woman finally lifted the folded paper and placed it in their hand. Your soulmate looked down and saw their own name written on the outside, followed beneath it by 3 words, "When you're ready." They almost opened it immediately. Almost. But the woman gently placed her fingers over the edge and shook her head. Not yet. Your soulmate looked confused. She took a slow breath and said, "First I need to tell you why I said their name." And suddenly the room felt different. This was the answer your soulmate had been circling since the moment your name left her lips. Why you? Why now? Why had she kept a letter? Why did she know about an unsent message no one had seen? The explanation began with something that had happened months earlier, something you may not even realize mattered. According to her, there had been a brief encounter, a conversation so ordinary that you might have forgotten it completely. You had said something about your soulmate when they were not there to hear it. Not a declaration. Not a dramatic promise. Just one sentence. Yet that sentence stayed with her because it revealed something about your heart that contradicted what your soulmate had been telling themselves about you. Your soulmate leaned forward. What did they say? The woman smiled, but instead of answering immediately, she asked another question. What do you think they said? Your soulmate looked away because their mind instantly supplied all the possibilities they secretly feared. Maybe you were disappointed. Maybe you had moved on emotionally long before they realized it. Maybe you had described them as someone you wished you had never trusted. But none of those possibilities matched the expression on the woman's face. There was tenderness there. Almost amusement. You always expect the hardest answer, she told them. That has been part of your problem. Then, quietly, she began describing the encounter. It had happened during an ordinary day when the two of you were already distant. You had every opportunity to complain about your soulmate. You had every reason to explain what had gone wrong from your perspective. Yet when their name came up, you did something she never forgot. You protected their dignity. You did not pretend they were perfect. You did not deny that things had become complicated. You simply refused to reduce them to their worst moment. You said, "They are a good person who got scared of something real. I hope someday they understand I never wanted to fight them. I only wanted honesty." Your soulmate's entire expression changed. Because those words were completely different from the story they had carried. They had assumed you resented them. They had assumed that if you ever spoke about them, you probably described the confusion, the disappointment, the distance. But privately, when there was nothing to gain and no reason to perform, you had chosen compassion. That realization reached somewhere pride could not reach. Their hand tightened around the folded paper. Their eyes moved toward the phone again. But the woman still had one more thing to say, and this was the part that would follow your soulmate long after that room became only a memory. She told them, "Do not contact someone because you are afraid to lose them. Contact them only when you are ready to meet them with truth." Your soulmate nodded slowly. That was different. It was not urgency. It was responsibility. It meant that missing you was not enough. Feeling something for you was not enough. Even regret was not enough. If they wanted another conversation, they needed to arrive differently than before. More honest. Less defensive. Ready to listen instead of simply trying to repair their own discomfort. And strangely, that thought gave them peace. They did not need to solve the entire future that night. They only needed to stop lying to themselves about the present. The present was simple, you still mattered. The connection still carried meaning. And there were words inside them that deserved to become honest, whether those words eventually led to reconciliation, understanding, friendship, closure, or something neither of you had imagined yet. Stay till the end of this moment, because what happened next was small enough that almost anyone else would have missed its significance. Your soulmate unlocked their phone. They opened the unsent message. They read it once. Then twice. Then they did something unexpected, they deleted almost all of it. Not because they had changed their mind, but because they suddenly realized those hundreds of carefully arranged words were another form of hiding. They were trying to explain everything before giving you space to say anything. So they opened a new message and typed only one sentence. "There is something I should have said honestly a long time ago, and if you are ever comfortable hearing it, I would like to tell you." Their thumb hovered above the screen. They did not send it. Not yet. The woman noticed and smiled. "Better," she whispered. Your soulmate smiled too, perhaps for the first time that day. And then came the final whisper, the one connected to your name, the one your soulmate will remember differently from every other sentence spoken in that room. She said your name again, followed by words so quiet your soulmate had to lean closer. What she told them was not simply about the past between you. It was about something she had noticed in you long before your soulmate understood it themselves. Something connected to why you stepped back when you did, why you never tried to force the connection, and why the sentence you once spoke about them had affected her so deeply. Your soulmate looked down at the sealed paper in their hand, and for the first time they noticed something written along the bottom edge in smaller letters, your initials. That was the moment everything shifted again. Because this was no longer only a letter from her to your soulmate. Somehow, a piece of your story was inside it too, and when your soulmate finally unfolded that page, they discovered why your name had been the last one she wanted them to hear. The first sentence inside that letter was not what your soulmate expected to see. They had prepared themselves for advice, for memories, perhaps even for a gentle reminder to make peace with whatever could no longer be changed. Instead, beneath the fold, written carefully in ink that had begun to fade slightly at the edges, were the words, "There is something about them you never understood because they never wanted to use it to make you stay." Your soulmate read that sentence twice. Then a third time. Their eyes moved toward your initials at the bottom of the page, and suddenly the room around them seemed quieter than before. What could you possibly have said? What had been placed inside this letter that you had never told them directly? Don't skip this moment, because the answer did not arrive as a dramatic confession. It arrived through a memory your soulmate had completely misunderstood. Months earlier, during one of the most confusing periods between you, there had been a day when you could have reached out. Your soulmate remembered it clearly because they had spent that entire evening watching their phone, secretly hoping your name would appear. It never did. And in the silence that followed, they created an explanation that slowly hardened into certainty: you did not care enough. You had chosen pride. You had moved forward easily. What they never knew was that on that exact day, you had spoken with the woman whose letter they were now holding. You had asked a question that had nothing to do with winning your soulmate back. You asked whether they were doing well. Not whether they missed you. Not whether they regretted anything. Not whether someone else had entered their life. Just whether they were okay. When she told you your soulmate was struggling with several things they had not shared openly, you became quiet. And then you said something she wrote down because she believed one day your soulmate might need to understand it. Then I should not make this about me. Your soulmate stopped reading. That single sentence rearranged an entire chapter of their memory. All this time, they had interpreted your silence as indifference, while you had been trying not to add emotional weight to a person you believed was already carrying enough. Was your decision perfect? Perhaps not. Could a conversation have helped both of you understand each other sooner? Possibly. But suddenly your soulmate could see something they had never considered: your distance had not necessarily been punishment. It may have been restraint. And restraint can be difficult to recognize when someone secretly wishes you would ignore every boundary and come closer anyway. Something softened inside them. Not because every misunderstanding vanished, but because the story became more human. Two people had been trying to protect themselves and, in different ways, protect each other. Neither had fully understood what the other needed. Neither had possessed the complete picture. And the silence between you had allowed assumptions to become louder than truth. Your soulmate continued reading. The woman described another conversation with you, one that had happened later. She had asked why you never defended yourself against some of the assumptions surrounding your connection. Your answer surprised her. You said, "If they need space from me to understand what they really want, I have to respect that. I don't want them choosing me because I convinced them. I want whatever they choose, to be honest." Your soulmate lowered the letter into their lap. That sentence hurt in a strangely beautiful way, because they recognized something about themselves immediately. They had spent months wondering why you did not fight harder, never considering that perhaps you were waiting for them to make a choice without pressure. And suddenly one of the deepest insecurities they carried began to change shape. Maybe your quietness had not meant, "You are easy to lose." Maybe it had meant, "You deserve freedom even if your freedom does not choose me." There is a difference, and your soulmate could finally feel it. Stay with this realization, because it became the first emotional turning point they could no longer explain away. Their mind returned to all the moments when you had given them room. At the time, they interpreted those moments through fear. When you stopped sending repeated messages after they became distant, they thought you had lost interest. When you did not demand explanations, they thought you did not care. When you accepted their uncertainty instead of trying to force an answer, they thought you were preparing to leave. Now those same memories look different. Perhaps you were doing something far more difficult. You were respecting a boundary that neither of you knew how to discuss properly. And this is where your soulmate began understanding something about love they had never fully learned. Sometimes care does not announce itself by holding tighter. Sometimes it is revealed by knowing when not to pull. The next section of the letter carried your initials again, this time beside a small date. Your soulmate recognized the date immediately. It was the day after your last meaningful conversation together. They remembered their own version of that evening vividly. They had walked away convinced they had disappointed you beyond repair. They had replayed your final expression repeatedly, interpreting every quiet pause as proof that you were done. But according to the letter, you had spoken to this woman the following afternoon. You had not been angry. You had been sad, yes, but your sadness had been unexpectedly gentle. She wrote that you never blamed your soulmate. Instead, you said, maybe we met each other at a time when both of us were still learning how to say what we needed. Your soulmate closed their eyes. That line struck harder than accusation ever could, because it held no villain. No winner. No loser. Just two people who had mattered to each other and had not yet known how to carry that meaning without becoming overwhelmed. What if that had been the truth all along? What if the connection had not fallen apart because one person cared and the other did not? What if both had cared, but each expressed that care in a language the other could not recognize at the time? Your soulmate leaned back in the chair and allowed that possibility to exist without arguing with it. For once, they did not immediately search for evidence against hope. They simply let themselves remember you accurately, not as an ideal, not as a mistake, not as the person who supposedly abandoned them, but as a complicated human being who may have been hurting quietly too. Something important is waiting for you in what happened next, because the letter then shifted away from your words and toward your soulmate. The woman had written directly to them. You may be tempted to read all of this and rush toward them. Please do not. Understanding is not permission to ignore where two people are now. Let this truth make you more honest, not more impulsive. Your soulmate smiled faintly through the emotion rising in their chest. Even now, she knew them. She knew how quickly a revelation could become an excuse to avoid patience. So they kept reading. If you speak again, do not arrive asking them to prove they still care. Arrive knowing what you need to take responsibility for. Do not ask whether they missed you before you tell them where you disappeared emotionally. Do not ask why they went quiet before acknowledging the times you made honesty difficult. And most of all, do not try to recreate what existed. Find out who both of you have become. Your soulmate rested their thumb over those words. Find out who both of you have become. That was different from going backward. It was different from chasing an old feeling. It gave the possibility between you something healthier, curiosity instead of expectation. For perhaps the first time, your soulmate imagined speaking to you without rehearsing an outcome. They imagined simply telling you the truth. I misunderstood some things. I see some things differently now. I am sorry for the moments when my fear became distance. I don't know what this means for us, but I didn't want silence to keep speaking for me. Those words felt possible. Real. No grand declarations. No promises neither of you could responsibly make. Just truth. Then your soulmate reached the portion of the letter that made them sit upright. At the bottom of the page was a short note in different handwriting. Yours. There could be no mistake now. They knew the shape of your letters. They remembered seeing your handwriting on cards, small notes, perhaps even insignificant things you never imagined they would remember. Yet there it was. Only a few lines. Your soulmate stared at them for several seconds before reading. If you ever give them this, only do it when you believe they can read it without feeling guilty. I don't want them carrying guilt because of me. Tell them I never needed perfection. I only wanted honesty, and I hope wherever life takes us, they learn that they never had to hide the parts of themselves they thought were difficult to love. Your soulmate covered their mouth with one hand. Not because the words were dramatic, but because they were so unmistakably connected to everything your soulmate had been struggling with privately. You had seen something they believed they had successfully hidden. You had noticed how often they tried to appear stronger than they felt. You had noticed their instinct to disappear emotionally whenever they feared disappointing someone. You had noticed their habit of trying to become easier, quieter, less complicated, as though love could only remain if they never asked for too much. And somehow, instead of judging that part of them, you had understood it. That was what the woman meant when she said your name. That was what she believed your soulmate had never understood. You were not waiting for them to become perfect enough to deserve connection. You had been waiting, perhaps, for them to believe they could be honest without immediately expecting rejection. Your soulmate stared at the phone again. The unfinished one-sentence message was still there. Their thumb hovered above it, but once more they did not send it. Something had changed. Earlier, they wanted to contact you because the letter had awakened hope. Now they realized they needed to contact you only if they could carry that hope gently. Hope could not become expectation. Your kindness could not become an obligation. The past could not become leverage. And your old words could not be treated like a guarantee about how you felt today. That realization made the feeling more sincere, not less. Your soulmate understood that respecting you meant respecting the present version of you too, even if that version had changed. So instead of sending the message, they opened the notes on their phone and began writing something else. Not to you. To themselves. They wrote 3 questions. What am I actually sorry for? What truth have I been avoiding? If they want nothing more than one honest conversation, can I accept that without turning it into rejection? They stared at the 3rd question longest. That was the real test. Could they approach you without secretly demanding that your response heal everything they had been carrying? Could they say what needed to be said and still respect whatever came afterward? Their answer was not immediate. And strangely, that was a sign of growth. The older version of your soulmate would have rushed to reassure themselves. This version sat with uncertainty. They let it be uncomfortable. Then they returned to the letter. There was still another page. Your initials were not on this one. Instead, the woman had written one final memory about you, something your soulmate had never heard. She described the last time your name came up between the two of them. She had asked you whether you believed the connection was finished. Your answer had been quiet. "I don't know," you said. "And I think I have to stop pretending I know. Maybe our paths meet again differently. Maybe they don't. I just hope they someday understand I never thought they were too much. I thought they were afraid of being fully seen." Your soulmate had to stop again. Fully seen. Those two words entered a place no apology could reach. Because that had always been the hidden tension between you. Being loved was one thing. Being seen was another. Being seen meant someone noticing the contradictions, the defenses, the tenderness beneath the stubbornness, the uncertainty beneath the confidence. And your soulmate suddenly remembered the exact moment they first realized you could see through them. It had happened during an ordinary conversation when they said, "I'm fine," too quickly. You had looked at them and replied, gently, "You don't have to be fine around me." At the time they laughed it away. Later, they changed the subject. But somewhere inside, that moment frightened them because it felt comforting. And comfort, when someone has spent years protecting themselves, can feel almost as vulnerable as pain. The letter was explaining something your soulmate had never been able to name. Perhaps they did not retreat because you meant too little. Perhaps they retreated because the connection asked them to stop performing strength. And they were not ready. Not then. But sitting there now, with the letter trembling slightly between their fingers, your soulmate whispered something they had never been able to admit aloud: "They really knew me." The woman beside them smiled. She had been waiting for that sentence. "Yes," she said. "And that is why your name was the one I needed to say." Your soulmate looked at her, confused again. "My name?" She shook her head gently. "No. Theirs." Then she explained that when she first realized how much unfinished understanding existed between you, she made herself a promise: if she ever had the right moment to speak honestly to your soulmate, she would not tell them what decision to make. She would simply return your words to them. She believed some truths belong to the person who originally spoke them, even if they arrive late. Your name was not her attempt to direct your soulmate toward you. Your name was a doorway into a truth your soulmate had been missing about themselves. And suddenly the title of this entire chapter of their life changed. It was no longer "the person who walked away from me." It became "the person who saw me when I did not know how to be seen." That distinction was enormous. Your soulmate slowly folded the letter again. The message on their phone remained unsent. They stood, walked toward the window, and looked outside for a long while. Nothing extraordinary had changed in the world. Cars still moved along the street. Lights turned on in nearby homes. Somewhere, someone laughed. Somewhere else, a television played behind a closed window. Yet inside your soulmate, an old story was quietly being rewritten, not into a fantasy, but into something closer to truth. They could finally hold two realities at once: what happened between you had been painful and imperfect, and what existed between you had also been meaningful. One truth did not erase the other. That emotional maturity was something they had not possessed when you were closest. Perhaps now they were beginning to. Stay till the end of this part, because your soulmate was still not finished discovering what the letter contained. When they returned to the chair and carefully folded the pages back together, something slipped from between them and landed face down on the floor. At first they thought it was another note. But when they bent down and picked it up, they realized it was a small photograph. An old one. You were in it. So were they. The photograph had been taken during a moment your soulmate barely remembered, one of those ordinary moments that becomes precious only after enough time passes. On the back was a sentence in the woman's handwriting: "Ask them what happened 5 minutes after this picture was taken." Your soulmate turned the photograph over again, studying every detail. Then their expression changed. They remembered. 5 minutes after that photograph, you had said something to them, something they had laughed off at the time because they did not understand how serious you were. Now, years or months later, the meaning of that sentence came rushing back with astonishing clarity. You had looked at your soulmate and said, "One day, when you stop trying so hard to protect yourself from good things, you're going to realize how much love was trying to reach you." Your soulmate stared at your face in the photograph. And then the woman spoke again, softer than before. "There is one reason I kept that picture." Your soulmate slowly lifted their eyes. She pointed toward something visible in the far corner of the photograph, almost hidden behind the two of you. Someone else was standing there. Someone your soulmate recognized immediately. Someone who had later played a surprisingly important role in the distance between you. And according to the woman, that person had heard every word you said that day.